The Washington Capitals have been one of the biggest stories of the 2024 offseason, and for good reason. They've made more impact moves than any other team in the NHL, gearing towards becoming more competitive in the 24-25 season. It's an interesting direction for a team that, despite making the playoffs, was realistically a very long ways away from a legitimate cup challenge. But the reason they're doing it is clear to everyone, and pretty unanimously supported in the Capitals fanbase. The millions of dollars spent in free agency, all the trades and moves they've made, mostly for the sake of just one player, Alexander Ovechkin. Capitals fans are largely in support of this idea, just as they should be. Ovechkin has been one of the greatest players in NHL history, entirely as a member of the Capitals, and brought the franchise its first Stanley Cup. But to take a roster that had essentially no chance to win, whose centerpiece player is going to be 39 years old in the next season, and transform them in efforts to be competitive instead of intentionally taking a step back, is unlike anything we've seen. Today, let's take a look at how the Capitals have built around Alexander Ovechkin, what their short-term and long-term future looks like after going in the direction they've chosen. Washington was lucky to make it into the 2024 playoffs. The Metropolitan Division was unusually weak, causing the Capitals to squeak into the playoffs with 91 points. It was quickly proven they didn't belong among contenders, as they were the first team eliminated in the postseason. The big highlight of the season for Washington was Charlie Lindgren, who proved to be a legit number one goalie. Dylan Strome had his most impressive season as a Capital too, with a team leading 67 points. The two new-ish Capitals led the way, while Ovechkin and Karlsson took another step back themselves, and franchise icons played what are likely their final few games ever in the NHL. Typically, a team with an aging former championship core would consider moving on at this point. The Blackhawks moved on from Kane and Keith. The Sharks let go of Thornton, Burns, Marlowe, and Pavelski eventually. But Washington has made their decision, and decided to push for the playoffs until the very end, surrounding what's left of the 2018 champions with the best the 2024 trade and free agency market had to offer. The Capitals kicked off their offseason with a big shakeup. $60 million in total salary entered their books in the form of Pierre-Luc Dubois, while $16 million left in the form of Darcy Kemper. On the ice, they gain a player that could very well end up centering any of the top three lines, while losing a goalie that took on a backup role for them last season. The Capitals are taking a gamble in acquiring a talented forward that has struggled, when at his best, Pierre-Luc Dubois is a top 6 center power forward, a type of player that is extremely hard to acquire on the open market. The problem is, he hasn't seemed to be at his best in a while. The Caps will be hoping he can return to that top level, but for what it's worth, Ovechkin seemed to approve of the move. Their next trade was the acquisition of Andrew Mangiapane for a second-round pick. Mangiapane's reputation around the league hasn't taken a Dubois-level hit from its peak, but it's somewhat of a similar situation. From 35 goals 2 seasons ago, Mangiapane had less than half of that last year. A change of scenery on what's expected to be a more offensively supportive team will hopefully help him regain some of that past form. Then, the Capitals replaced Kemper with Golden Knights goalie Logan Thompson. For them, this serves as a way to preserve how good their goaltending was last season. Washington will be hoping Lindgren can be as good as he was last year, but given his career path, that's certainly not a guarantee. Thompson can serve more as a 1B than a backup if necessary, and all it cost them was a couple third-round picks. Then, on July 1st, which proves to be the busiest day around the league most years, the Capitals were one of the busiest teams. Their biggest move was the acquisition of Jacob Chychrun, yet another distressed asset, in exchange for defenseman Nick Jensen and a third-round pick. Even in a down year, Chychrun was valued among the top players on the market, and the Capitals came across as huge winners for pulling off this deal. Chychrun brings an offensive skill set to make up for some of the declining skills in John Carlson's game. While losing the defensive abilities of Jensen, and more specifically, a right-shot defender isn't insignificant itself, the Capitals plugged that hole pretty quick. The same day they had signed Matt Roy, formerly of the LA Kings. From an analytical perspective, Roy can be viewed essentially as Jensen, but better. A capable second-pair right-shot defensive defenseman. While the contract could get rough in the long term, it looks great in the short term, which is all the Capitals care about. Roy would prove to be the biggest signing, but not the only notable one. Depth forwards Brandon Duhaime and Taylor Raddysh were also added to the roster. In terms of upside, Raddysh is the more interesting of the two. He scored 20 goals in the 22-23 season and played 3 seasons alongside Dylan Strome in junior. So, to recap, the Capitals brought in 7 roster players, meaning that 30% of the NHL roster will consist of new additions to the squad. There will undoubtedly be road bumps through this process. Big changes like this could disrupt the chemistry and see the Capitals get off to a slow start. However, in the long term of the upcoming season, it's pretty obvious that the Capitals are a greatly improved squad. Even despite the weak competition they faced last year, it's hard to imagine that if they were a playoff team last year, that they couldn't be one again this year. Placing significant trust in aging stars is scary, but to be fair, they do have some young stars that could step up, compensating for the decline of others over the coming years. Unfortunately, Ryan Leonard is going back to Boston College. Capitals fans were hopeful that he would be able to join them for their 2024 playoff run, but that didn't happen. And for this upcoming season, Leonard is still opting to stay in college hockey. With their best prospect out of the mix, that still leaves a few interesting young players, such as Connor McMichael, Hendrix Lapierre, and Ivan Miroshnichenko. All 3 are former first-round picks that played NHL games last season, but only McMichael is a full-time NHL regular. All have the potential to break in or take an increased role, but it might be tough in what's suddenly become a pretty competitive forward group. The Capitals have bought low on tons of different players and taken some pretty big swings in the process. The management seems happy with what they've done, the fans do too, and so does Ovechkin. Barring an absolute disaster, next year's Washington Capitals are going to be a competitive team. The only question is just how competitive, in a division that's expected to be significantly stronger when compared to last season. At the end of the day, Caps fans would probably still be happy to miss the playoffs if it means Ovechkin can inch closer to that goal record. No question adding players like Chychrun, Dubois, and Mangiapane should help generate offense and take more attention away from Ovi on the power play. Everybody seems pretty impressed with what the Capitals were able to cook up over the past couple months, and it most definitely beats the strategy of coasting in mediocrity and wasting the final few seasons of a superstar. Retooling so aggressively around a player as late in his career as Ovechkin is something that hasn't been done much, if at all. While they may not have the high-end talent of many other competitors, the Capitals are going to be among the most fun teams in the league to follow over the upcoming season. If this works, it could work as the model for aggressive retools among many teams of the future. If it doesn't, well, then hopefully Ovechkin can at least pump in some extra goals with all the added talent surrounding him.